Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, my partner in crime as usual, Vasili, Gianarakos, my friend. Welcome back for another episode. How you doing?
Doing well, Yariv, and we have really a lot to talk about in terms of the Flyers with, Danny Briere getting the interim tag removed and Keith Jones being named the president, and we have the draft analyst himself on the show with us today, so going to be a great episode. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Thanks, man. And perfect lead in to our guest. He's been on quite a bit before. Steve Kournianos, the draft analyst. Steve, welcome back to the show, buddy. How you doing?
Great. Always glad to be back. It's great. A lot of stuff going on with the Flyers. So
is this considered busy season for you?
Man, it's always busy season, but it ramps up because I'm making the.
It's like tax season.
It's like the draft report's coming out soon. So this is all the scouting has pretty much been done. All the teams have been analyzed. All their press conferences have been viewed and broken down and try to. That's all. If I'm going to analyze the draft, I got to figure out what the teams are thinking too. So, but all that stuff is done. We got the Memorial Cup coming up. The CHL playoffs, by the way, going on right now. Very interesting stuff. And then the IHF World Championships, we have some big names playing there. And then it's the Combine, and then that's it. And then everyone will figure out who's going to be in the Stanley Cup, and then and that's it. So it's really like the next month and a half. It should be really nothing but draft talk and whatever handful of teams are remaining in the playoffs.
Yeah, and if you're not a good team, which the Flyers are not, this is pretty much the most exciting time. And I think I've heard you even talk about this in your on your podcast before, where it's like this is the time for fans to get excited about promise and what's to come, right? Like if you're not good on the ice, at least sell me on what's coming, right?
Yeah, it's more realistic too to focus on the draft than to focus on free agency and roster construction, because we all like to play that game, but let's be honest here, there's a rumor going on that Connor McDavid isn't happy at Edmonton. Oh, well, let me just put him in the lineup. You can only have that conversation for so long. The draft, 10 of the top 200 kids, or 9 in the Flyers case, they're going to be Flyers. You know what I mean? There's no, so although there is a little bit of ambiguity and a lot of speculation with the draft itself, still, when your team's done, that's it. Focus on the draft, because what happens after the draft? Literally 3-4 days after, it's free agency. So the draft becomes an afterthought. You're not going to talk about those kids or care about
a plan in quick succession, pretty much.
Yeah, until development camp or rookie camp. So this is the time to focus on the draft if your team is not playing in the playoffs.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I love the way you said that you get 10 or 9 of the players of the top 200, and I love that when you really think about it, because people like to think about, it's 7th round pick, but this 7th round pick is still one of the best hockey players for his age group in the world.
Sure.
Otherwise, they're not even being
gets overlooked
included.
Though when you're out of the first round a lot of the time, right?
And look at Desnoyers, so you can't even just discount the fact that it's a 6th or 7th round pick. He was I think a 5th, but you can't discount that. There are future Flyers right now who don't know they're going to be future Flyers, and one way to learn about them is to follow you guys and watch a podcast and and read my draft report and a lot of stuff. So
absolutely. All right, before we continue, just real quick, please like to say in the beginning now, please subscribe, comment, do all that stuff for our video. It's a humongous help. We really appreciate it, and it definitely helps grow and drive our show. Please take a second to do that if you can. The other thing is, so we're going to go through the Keith Jones, Danny Briere press conference. The Flyers were all out on that one. I was on site for that. Was, I would say, maybe a bigger show than what it actually was, at least to me. Then we're going to talk about draft talk. We're going to go into Steve's top 10. We'll go into some mock drafts, some options for the Flyers, all that fun stuff, and then we'll end it with some playoff conversation. So I think we'll go relatively deep on this like we usually do, but let's start with the Flyers. So again, recent big news. We talked about this on the podcast. Nobody knew this was coming. Keith Jones was finally named the president of hockey operations by the Philadelphia Flyers, a late dark horse candidate, but really probably was a top candidate for a while. We were told that he wanted it to be essentially a secret until there was a decision made whether he was going to get it or not. I don't think he wanted to affect his reputation and for people to think he was biased for the Flyers and whatnot. It would have probably created a problem. But Keith Jones gets selected. Danny Briere gets the interim tag taken off. And the Flyers now have their leadership core. They have this humongous press conference where they kind of go all out and bring in high school hockey players and season ticket holders and kind of put on a big show for about an hour, which I thought it had a lot of corporate speak. But I did glean some nice stuff out of there. So let's open it up. Steve, we'll go to you first, and obviously Vasili just chime in immediately. What do you think, on an outside view, maybe first start with Danny Briere, and then, what do you think about now kind of naming Jones, and then two guys with, obviously deep history in hockey, experience in the industry, but also new to their roles, respectively?
Well, the most important thing off the bat is that they said at the press conference that Jones is the hire and the firer. Like, he's in charge of everything. So although they keep talking about unity and togetherness and collaboration or collaborative, whatever the watchword or buzzword was, that there's probably going to be input from the corporate suit types or the non-hockey ops types when there's fan like the town hall meeting where there's yelling and with the fans are angry, or there's bad PR, or they're losing streak, then they might get involved. But ultimately, it is going to be Keith Jones making all the decisions. And I like the fact that he said what a lot of people don't really talk about, except around trade deadline, is that these guys, these GMs and team presidents, they're all like ex-teammates and friends, and they're what I mean. So Jones played with Joe Sakic. He's like really good friends with Craig Berube. So he mentioned that. I like the fact that he brought that up because it's going to help maybe a little bit when it comes to making deals. And, you don't want to, if you have a lifelong friendship, you don't want to screw the other guy over lying about a guy's health or, a situation like that. But as far as Briere goes, hiring him and then the Jones thing, it's not unheard of. John Davidson went from being a national color analyst for NBC, for Hockey Night in Canada. Before that, Fox, and he went right from the broadcast booth to the presidency or the GM of the Blues. And they had just started reading. They were bad. This is like early 2000s, like mid 2000s. They were really bad. And within a couple of years, he pretty much helped fix everything. So, history is on Briere's side to a degree, at Jones's side, because there is a precedent there. And then Briere also being a part of the organization and working in the front office, or being kind of like having that bird's eye view. Both men, they're not coming from the outside. That doesn't guarantee success, though. So, I think Torts by himself is probably a bigger factor than those two guys right now. You know what I mean? In the short term. But, one thing that they didn't really talk about, though, is like the way ahead. Is it going to involve spending money? Is it going to involve getting rid of people, buying people out, promoting more kids? That really wasn't, unless I missed it. I really didn't hear all that. So I think the hires are good hires, but there's risk involved because you have an inexperienced general manager who's loved by the fan base, but how much are they going to love him if the team keeps losing? And of course, Keith Jones, we all love Keith Jones. I mean, he's a very smart hockey guy, but at the end of the day, it's going to be all about W's and L's, and really the conference. Like, that conference is no joke. Now, you had 4 teams end their rebuilds last season just because they didn't make the playoffs. Yeah. Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa ended their rebuilds, and of course, New Jersey ended theirs. Look what they ended up doing. So I guess the question really should be, can the Flyers be one of those teams next season? That's all going to depend on the moves made by Briere and Jones. And remember that they hired like firms to go find these guys. And even Jones said it was an exhaustive interviewing process. So I think there's going to be some micromanaging involved in this. I don't think it's going to be just Jones and Briere running the show. I think there's going to be some like they're, and I'm speculating here, so just keep that in mind. Sure. I think that they are going to be watched very closely because there's a lot of money involved in this. When the Wells Fargo Center is empty or half empty, That's a huge deal. And, but again, you got to give them the benefit of the doubt. They did their due diligence. They brought it. They did their homework, and they picked the two best candidates. But we have to wait and see what happens at the draft, what happens in the offseason, and ultimately the beginning of next season.
And just real quick, Vasili, before you hop in, to that point, Steve, I'm pretty sure that's why they split the role up into two. Because of the amount of corporate oversight that they are going to experience, and how the communication between corporate to hockey to fans is really critical for them with this.
Yeah.
And I think they needed somebody, and I think it's not ironic that they picked a public-facing communications expert and hockey mind to do that. I think it says a lot.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just to jump off on what you said, Steve, I think in terms of it all and overall, I think Hilferty probably will be very involved, just kind of in overseeing everything and kind of just ensuring that things are staying along the right path. I think that's a major point, and he kind of alluded to that a bit within the press conference, that's kind of what he's doing, bringing together, a bunch of different leaders to collaborate, which was the buzzword of the whole conference.
Yeah.
Right? We heard them kind of say it the whole time, all this collaboration, but he's kind of going to oversee things, and I think he'll be a little more involved and hands-on in doing that. And if things aren't kind of going the right way, he'll probably interject and say, hey, what's happening here, versus the prior regime with Dave Scott, where he was kind of, I don't think, as involved as Dan Hilferty will kind of be in this role. And then obviously in hiring Keith Jones here, I mean, if you look at Jones, I mean, and his past experiences, obviously as a color commentator, even being his own agent, which is very interesting. If you listen to some of those stories, he knows everybody in the business, and obviously has a ton of connections. Being in that role as the commentator, you do get to talk to the coach and have like kind of those media meetings with them, and obviously talking to higher ups in other organizations, like presidents. And even general managers of other teams. You probably do gain a lot of insight. And I mean, your job is as an analyst to watch the game and analyze the other players. So I'm sure he's going to have, some good input, and he'll be good help and somebody to lean on for Briere. Though it is definitely something to highlight that there isn't a lot of experience in terms of the business acumen or really being in this role before. He is green in this role, as is Briere in the role that he's in. So it's an interesting kind of way for the Flyers to go, because I did personally think that, with Briere being the inexperienced guy, you're probably going to see the president be somebody more experienced, like a Doug Wilson that we alluded to on the show before, or like a Ray Shero or something of that ilk. So I think them going the inexperienced route, it kind of means that they're looking for a lot of fresh ideas and the way they're kind of looking about this. I mean, with two inexperienced guys, sometimes they can think out of the box and tackle things in different ways. So maybe that's kind of what they're looking to do. It'll really kind of come down to what happens at the draft and the offseason and how it all comes about. And then we'll see from there. One thing for Briere that I really actually liked at the press conference that I noticed was, I mean, he mentioned that obviously he's been in this role prior to this as the special assistant to the general manager. And he said he worked with a ton of different departments and things of that nature. And I think when doing that, you kind of have a guy that you earmarked in to be this GM in your organization, almost self-auditing, like saying, hey, like, I came into this Chuck Fletcher regime and, things are really wrong. And there's a lot of things that are kind of misplaced. I kind of have to fix them. So having him come in and kind of doing that before jumping into this role maybe kind of gives him a head start to kind of weed out the problems internally that they might need to fix within the organization that's kind of led to this position that they're in right now. So I think that, at least for Briere, might be a good thing. They did say like he's going to have full autonomy of the hockey decisions. I'm kind of interested to see that. I don't know. I mean, if that's actually going to be the case, kind of as to what you said, Steve. I think it'll really depend on how it goes and kind of how they perceive the first moves of this kind of regime, at least in terms of the fans and how it all goes next season. But I think for Jones and Briere for now, like it's good that there's been change and that they're kind of leaning towards a new group, because obviously the past group, I think, just ran its tenure out at this point. So I think it's definitely fresh voices, fresh ideas are what the Flyers kind of need, right, to move forward and kind of get back to what we're used to from them, I would say.
Yep.
Yeah, man, I think for sure, and I love the mention of the collaboration. I feel like they need like a hand sign when they're
literally
when they're repeating it over and over again. But I did like The thing I did like about Dan Hilferty is that he did come out and said, hey, we're aligned. He tried to reference specific fans. Regardless of whether you think it's disingenuous or not, it is irrelevant. This is a man who is obviously paying attention to detail. I don't feel like we were getting that with Dave Scott. Now, because Dave Scott's not detail oriented, I feel like he was kind of checked out. Like, I never really felt
he was that involved. Exactly.
I don't think he was ever that involved. I don't think we want Dan Hilferty to start micromanaging anybody really, but you do want to see that there's a large investment from Comcast to get this back. You want to see that public for the fans at this point. I think they kind of need that stuff, but you brought up a great point, Steve, and I think we should talk about this. You talked about the way forward and no mention of this. And I think that's really important. And again, I talked about the communication element with Keith Jones. I think he said some awesome stuff about loving to play here. And first of all, using that word love in particular, you never hear anybody use that. And he's saying we love you. He literally said it to the fans. You never heard anybody say that. You can already see the effect that this guy is going to have. Yeah. But I do believe this, and people might, maybe don't agree with me, especially in Philadelphia media. Like, I think all of this terminology of a rebuild, all this stuff, I think it's complete lip service. All of it. I think Fletcher was terrible at it, and that's why we're getting this role split. And he's a bad communicator with that sense. And he also didn't execute well. If he wasn't a great communicator and he was executing, it wouldn't have mattered. But the fact it was a combination of the two, he just couldn't say anything right or do anything right. I think in this case, there aren't a full set of options for the Flyers to do moving forward. They don't have a full canvas of moves and be like, well, they could compete for the next 5 years and they have a superstar to build around, and they're kind of in the playoff, but they're not in that position. They haven't been in that position since Claude Giroux has been gone. Like, that alone is you've already walked away from that. So when I hear like rebuild and all that, to me it seems like lip service. What I think is that this is a process, and every year you go at it until you buy your window. You mentioned something earlier, Steve, where you said, could this team be in a team that moves away from being in a rebuild? Kind of insinuating a little bit that this can happen in a year. Not that it will, but let's be clear about that. But that things can turn around quickly, or they can obviously take even much longer than you anticipate. But do you see the Flyers kind of in that position here where they can't really label what this is? Because they're kind of in a weird wait and see mode in general. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, there's one trump card in this, and that's Tortorella. If you look at his entire career, he's rarely been at the helm of just a disaster, right? Like, his teams might regress a little bit. And obviously what we saw last year from the Flyers, night and day. So even though they only improved by 10, 15 points, or whatever it was, it was just it was night and day. It was night and day. The Flyers that you saw on the ice, whether they were younger, there was accountability. Kevin Hayes was held accountable. Everyone was held accountable. And so the issue, though, is, cap space, right? Flexibility, contracts, like what kind of lineup can we build on, right? So they went with mostly kids this year. Well, not mostly kids, but they went with more kids this year because they really had no other choice. And Torts obviously liked what he saw from a lot because he played them. He put them in big roles and etc. But again, you have to look at the landscape of the conference, right? That the Islanders, like the teams who took a step back maybe, or you could see like Boston, a huge disappointment what happened with them in terms of the playoffs. And you don't know what's going to happen with them. They're going to win another 60 games next year. That never happens. The Islanders, Pittsburgh, Washington. So now they might be on the downturn. But, there are a bunch of teams, and I think the Flyers are in the same zone with Columbus and Montreal, where they have NHL players on the roster. They've been there for a while. Maybe a new voice or a stronger supporting cast could get them an extra 5 or 10 points in the standings. But, it's really crazy. The second trump card the Flyers have, I think, is their farm system. They have really good kids. Maybe they don't get rated high by the Hockey News or something like that. But if you look at how a lot of them have progressed, they're in Lehigh Valley. Lehigh Valley made the playoffs this year. And I think they didn't make it since 2018, although they kind of made the rules funky in the AHL to get in. But still, like Lehigh Valley was promising this year, you had good years out of some kids.
That was led by kids for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Forster, Desnoyers, Urson in goal. So I think really that, well, I think that if they they'll have to part with some of these kids eventually, because not all these kids are going to hit and be NHL players with the Flyers. So they have some things in their favor, more so than I think other teams. Let's say Detroit 5 years ago, or the Devils 5-6 years ago, where you knew, or Buffalo, where you knew it was going to take at least 10 years. I don't see that happening with the Flyers. I see it happening rather quickly, but at what point does the front office or corporate step in and say, all right, we trust that you and your pro scouts know what's going on, etc. Now go out and spend money, but it's on you if it fails. And so, but I don't know if they're there just yet. I think they want to see if Torres could get, it's like squeezing a lemon. If you get more juice out of the lemon next season, with more kids being introduced. But I could be mistaken. For all we know, the mandate could be in the offseason, just spend, buyouts, trade prospects, and let's try to do what the Devils did. But, it's not a bad position to be in for the Flyers, but, they didn't tell us. We have no idea how long this is going to take. We have no idea what the vision is. Like,
and we don't really know. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We don't really know what they're going to do or what really the plan is, and that's the problem, right?
Yeah, like Keith Jones, his eyes have seen a lot of NHL talent. Like, so he's going to definitely have a say. He's like, oh, I haven't watched this guy. He stinks. I don't want him. But again, we just I didn't get a whole lot out of that press conference in terms of like the vision, the way ahead. Like, what kind of, we know they're going to be competitive because of Torts, and that they're going to be a little bit younger and they have to maybe get leaner, but. I mean, listen, for all we know, they could be like preparing for a Chicago style. And Chicago might be a good comparable because it's a big major market with a winning tradition. And although they had a big scandal that kind of left them with no option, like the ownership was like, we're rebuilding and we're going to rebuild for a long time. We might hear that. I'm lost. Yeah. I have no idea what to expect out of the Flyers. If they stay the course with what they got now, maybe they make another 5-10 points. But is that enough to bring the fans back? And what are they calling it? The new era of orange, or new orange era?
The new era.
It's definitely a huge marketing tactic by them, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, okay, but I'm assuming that they're going to want to be somewhat competitive if it's a new era.
Yeah.
But the new era could mean new people, like just getting rid of anything that Fletcher had his hands on.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think a lot of people do want to see that, right? Kind of just remnants of that old regime kind of get removed. But like, you make a great point that it wasn't really laid out for us whatsoever, really, in the press conference of what's going to happen here, or kind of the way about it that they're going to go. I think there was more insight probably in Briere's initial presser when he got introduced as the interim.
Yeah.
They were kind of asking him, like, is this a rebuild? What's your plan in terms of like the goals for the roster moving forward? And he said, well, we do plan to rebuild, but it isn't a fire sale. So that also is conflicting in the sense that, well, if you're going to rebuild, usually you trade a lot of your players away.
That was my whole lip service.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Exactly. So like, it's very interesting to know, or like see where they're going to go here, because it's hard to see, obviously, because they haven't given us much in terms of insight. Like, I think what will happen is, we've said on the podcast previously, like, a lot of the older guys that are probably 30 plus will potentially try to be moved if they can be moved, and then go with some of younger players next season. Plus, you're getting back a Sean Couturier and an Atkinson. So, I mean, you have those guys stepping into bigger roles for you. So they probably do look to Tortorella to say, hey, like, see what you can get out of a couple more young guys like a Forster, a Desnoyers, who had success in Lehigh coming up potentially. And then you have a Couturier and Atkinson. What does that do for us? And then who knows on the blue line kind of how they go there, because I do know Keith Jones mentioned that's the big focus for them, to ensure that they're built out from the back end moving ahead. So I wonder if that means there's some moves on defense they look towards. But yeah, like, it's really down to the draft, I think, and kind of what they do there. And then we kind of get, I think, some more ideas of what the actual plan is. Because right now, it's hard to tell. Like, what do you think?
Go ahead, Steve, if you had something to say.
No, I was going to say, and the other thing that's important, too, to bring up is that Tortorella has a big say in roster construction. He knows who can play for him and who can play for him. So he's now had the full season, right? And he's had his meetings with the front office. He's had his meetings with Jones. He's going to have more meetings probably.
Yeah.
What he's going to say, hey, like the chef, he wants, if he's going to do the cooking, he wants to have a say in the menu. So the other part of that is, what do other teams, if there is some type of like retool or like not fire sale, but they're gonna get rid of some people. I don't know how they're gonna do it, but if let's just say they can. Like, look at what Minnesota did when Guerin took over. He bought out Parise and Suter, unheard of. Like, no one was expecting that, and they're paying for it. But they've been 100-point team the last 2 years.
They've been competitive, exactly, and they have
it cost them Fiala, but Boldy came in. So, I'm not saying it's all perfectly Minnesota because they still have their playoff problems. But the point I'm saying is that what I'm trying to say is that that if you identify players that you can live without, then we could be seeing, or I guess we're about to see, a major roster overhaul. But again, how are you gonna sell Kevin Hayes to another team, and you're gonna have to retain his salary? I mean, he's got restrictions, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's got a modified no trade. So I think it's I think it's 11 or 12 teams maybe.
There's a rumor deal in place potentially. I don't know how true this is, but deal in place between Columbus and the Flyers, and that there's
because Torts has his plays down there that he probably wants. I mean, but. Again, man, it really is.
They want Hayes apparently to play with Johnny Gaudreau. They're good friends. That's what we're hearing. I don't know.
We'll see, right? That's what we say with the rumors. You never know until we get there.
Well, here's the one thing. So the one thing that I will say, and I sent this to you, Vasili. I can send it to you as well, Steve. So there were the huddle interviews with Dan Hilferty and Danny Briere and Keith Jones. I only listened. I was only around Hilferty and Briere, and I got to ask Briere a question. I did send the Briere convo to Vasili, but I did get to ask Briere one question there at the end, and I asked him, if you aside from making moves, can this team be better? Like, if you can't make moves, do you expect this team to be better? Can they be better? And he was like, absolutely. So to that point that you said, Steve, I think that they're absolutely going, they called John Tortorella their spiritual leader, at least Dan Hilferty did. And I think for sure it starts with Torts. He analyzes and goes, yes, no, and now they're going.
Yeah, this is who we can work with. This is who we can't to kind of get to that next level.
Absolutely. But I think 100%. He mentioned this fire sale. When I looked at Chicago, that's a team that was kind of going nowhere fast. They made that trade for Jones. They overpaid for him, which I knew was an overpayment when they paid for him.
Sure.
They gave him a monster contract on top of it. They were heading in the wrong direction for a few years, and not their young asset really was DeBrincat at this point.
Doc,
and they traded both those guys. But beyond that, they didn't really have a team they were building out. They started trading out guys that they had, even young guys who were good. They traded they never had a team collective to build a team. They didn't really know where they were going. Then finally somebody made a decision and said, all right, we're going to sell off whatever we have. We have these two humongous monster contracts. We can't get rid of them for a couple of years anyway. Right, it was kind of a decision that was made to tank the team that was going nowhere. And while I see similarities with the Flyers, I think it's really important what you said, and I agree with you. If you look at this team, it was led by young guys last year. If you look at the Phantoms, it was led by young guys. This isn't a team devoid of a bunch of young talent. It might not have all of the pieces needed to see that vision, but it's not a start from scratch. It's okay, we probably should have started from scratch last year, and Fletcher overstayed his welcome. The D'Angelo additions was not necessary. To continue to pull and squeeze to try to get into a bubble spot, that was the mistake. But the work that was done prior to that, I think, was good work. I do think we have the basis here for a team that can incrementally get better. And I'll go back to you, Steve, again first. Do you see that? Because I keep talking about it, so maybe I sound crazy, but the way I see getting better is that it's an incremental process, and that every year you look to get a little bit better until you become a contender, and then your goal is to keep that window alive 5-10 years and go at it as many times as you can till you finally break through and win a cup. Because you're not going to go to the cup many times, and you're not going to win many times, right? If you get 1 or 2, that's incredible. So is that kind of how you see this playing out, that the Flyers kind of look to get a little bit better every year until suddenly, the Flyers are good again, and it kind of snuck up on you, kind of like New Jersey a little bit too, where they had a setback, and then all of a sudden this year kind of popped off, but it was a yearly process of getting better. It just didn't look that way to everybody else, right?
Well, the Devils are basically an anomaly. They had the greatest. I think they had the greatest single season turnaround in league history.
Yeah, that's
whereas usually when a team is in a funk and they go through all types of different leadership changes and rebuild, retool, a change, buy everybody at the deadline or at the free agency. Usually, when a team takes that next step, it was at least at a minimum like a 500 team with some moments during the season where the GM and the staff could say, wow, we've become a tougher team to play against, and let's see if we could do it again next season. And we'll add a couple of pieces here and there. And so this technically, I think, was year 1 for the Flyers, right? Not 2, 3, 4, even though they haven't made the playoffs. I think that this year was year 1 because you saw a drastic, significant change for the better.
Totally agree.
And that there is a culture, there is an identity, and so obviously the cap is having a say. But I think that technically, and I'm being honest when I say this, if they had the flexibility to do it cap wise, I think the Flyers are maybe 3 moves away from being at least a 40 win or 45 win team, because they have guys who've proven it, just not consistently, right? Carter Hart, he could steal you games. He just can't do it consistently. You have guys like Farabee, and you have Cates, and you had and listen, even guys like Tippett. He was drafted in 2017. He was drafted a while ago, so he's not really like a up and coming prospect. He's paid his dues in the AHL, and you see a lot of these guys do it. So I think that if they had the flexibility to do that, your Provorov, there's ass on that roster, right? There's ass on it, and I mean that in a good way. But the thing is, they really can't though. They really can't, because they have to. You don't want to commit like the Devils committed to Palat. They committed whatever, but the Devils had no choice to go out and try to give Vanacek a chance and to go out and get Dougie Hamilton 2 years before that. So, again, it's why these guys get paid the big bucks, man. Like they're going to assess the roster based off the recommendations from the staff and the coaching staff, the front office staff. But, I can't see any type of turnaround, any major turnaround, unless they add, they add significant names, notable names, and they make like a blockbuster trade and go for it like that. But I don't know if they're there yet, because teams have done that before and it's backfired miserably.
Yeah.
And you brought up the Seth Jones trade, doubling down, hubris,
going for it too quick, right? Where maybe you should wait a little bit. It's not the time, right?
Seth Jones will solve all our problems, and we'll lose an unprotected pick. I don't care. They got lucky with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, hey, by the way, if Chicago won the lottery last year, that pick would have went to Columbus.
Wow.
Because it would have been an unprotected 2023. Yeah. So freaking Bowman, man. But anyway, so, to answer your question, I think that, it will happen incrementally. And I don't see it being like a 10-year job or even a 7 or 5-year job. This is going to be like a 2 to 4 year job to get them back to the playoff bubble and get into a wild card spot. But remember, it's going to take someone to fall out. The Leafs might have profound changes. Florida, were they regressing considering what happened in the regular season? And now they're just like a Cinderella story. Tampa Bay, what's going to happen? They've been trading away all their draft capital for years. So this is all part of strategic long range planning, right? And if you backwards plan, if you pin the rows, right, you say, hey, 2027, that's our year. Then you got to, when you backwards plan, you also have to look at the other teams as well and who they're going to be losing. Stamos is going to be 39.
Yeah. What their trajectories are, exactly.
Yeah, so there's a lot to it, and I think that they hired the right people who qualified to make those types of assessments. But the key thing is how you're going to get the fans interested. Maybe one way to look into the whole a new era of collaborative, all this other stuff is that, hey, we're going to suck, guys. Please be our friends and be patient with us, and please come to the game, because
that's kind of what they're saying.
Yeah. We're going to be different. We're going to be new, but it's kind of like, I don't know if we're there yet, and just support us. Don't spend your money elsewhere.
Can I ask you guys? Can I ask you guys this? Do you think, and this is to both of you, do you guys think that the combination of Jones and Briere, does that attract free agents?
I would say, just to answer that question, Jones and Briere, I don't know if it necessarily attracts free agents, but I do think in terms of just maybe like negotiations, it is an upgrade from Fletcher. Just based on kind of what he did with free agents and kind of just signing players at an overvalue. I don't know if Briere and Jones are going to necessarily subscribe to that method, so I think that's a good thing for the Flyers. Also, too, just to kind of like go back a little bit, if you look at just kind of what happened there, and if the Flyers can get better without making a lot of changes, I think if they kind of left the roster as is and essentially went into next season, I do think they would be close to the bubble. Like, you have a lot of younger guys like Tippett, Cates, Farabee, guys who took strides this season. But I'm unsure, like, if, like Steve was saying, right, without those major moves, if they're really going to make an impact. So obviously it's kind of an interesting thing to see what they're going to do there. But I will mention, like, this past season, they had 21 one-goal losses, 13 losses in the shootout and overtime. So, like, they were way, way more competitive. So, like, if you do add one extra guy, let's say, and you get back Couturier, Atkinson, or, you look at it from that perspective, they could be a lot more, they could be a lot more competitive and be back on the bubble there. So, like, I think in terms of how they're going to go about it, it depends. Like, they could strip the roster down and, like you were saying, Steve, kind of be going like, hey, we're going to be really bad, and then we're going to get some high draft picks, and with the young core that looks really good, we're going to keep those guys, and then we're going to have a lot of, like, younger players coming in and see what we can do with them. But it'll be an interesting thing, because with the Tortorella factor, I don't know if he's willing, to wait so long to kind of see this through. Like, he might kind of be at the end of his rope by the time this team's ready to take it to the next level, if it is end up being a 4-year thing. So that's what kind of has me confused. It's like, okay, I don't think they're going to really strip it all the way down here, right? But
yeah, for sure. Steve, what do you think about the free agency element? And by that I mean, like, does that appeal more to players? Like, the idea.
Well, it's like, first of all, remember that Torch doesn't have the best reputation with everybody.
Well, that's why I was thinking this, and Jones.
So there are going to be players that are like, I ain't playing for that guy, and listen, that's in a way what you want. Because if Torches is like, hey, I'm going to be a hard ass and we're going to fight and be tough, and I want you to give me 1,000% every shift, then you don't want guys that are going to be like, well, like the prima donnas and so on. Now, obviously, that type of coaching strategy has a shelf life, and but as far as like like JVR, you're going to free up some money there.
Yeah,
I think a big, like Vasili, you said too, and about the LTIR guys, like what's going? I mean, that's money. They're still getting paid. So, like, what's going on with all that money that you got tied up with Couturier and with Ellis and Atkinson? Atkinson had a neck surgery.
Yeah.
So it's like
these
are that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
3 guys, yeah, exactly.
To the people that are cutting the checks, they're like, dude, that's a lot of money, and we ain't getting shit from these guys. And not like because they're lazy, so they're hurt.
It's like $15 million almost.
Yeah, so it's like what options do they have? I mean, the players aren't. If the players retire, they're not going to get paid.
Yep.
So they're going to try to drag this out, and again, Fletcher, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. But it's just if they go with mostly kids, and again, you could have a situation like look at the Rangers a couple of years ago. I don't think their roster, the way that they were constructed 2 years ago, was like that much different from the Flyers. Okay, Panarin was a big one, and but Shesterkin playing out of his mind. He was a Hart finalist. Okay, the Rangers had one of the youngest. Insane. So I'm not saying that we should put that kind of pressure on Carter Hart, but there's always a chance that a goalie. You know how goalies are, like one up, one down. And not that Hart was bad this year because he had a bounce back year.
He was pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, he stole a lot of games for them too. He gave all those one goal games. He was a big reason why. But what if he takes it to the next level?
Exactly, right. And that skill's always been there for him. So I mean, that's what the Flyers are hoping for, I'm sure, right? For him to kind of jump up there.
And then that adds to the free agency, like and trade deadline. Like, oh, look at that. The Flyers are up and coming. They're young. And on top of that, you have maybe that's part of the marketing campaign is you want to talk about the history and how passionate the fans are and how great of a town it is. And, it's like, what is it? The fifth biggest city in the country, metropolitan area. So like, there's a lot they don't have to do a whole lot to sell the Flyers to free agents. It's just a matter of now. The last thing is it's not that great of a free agent class this year. It's kind of like, everyone who got extended they got extended. Yeah. So it's like you don't want to start overpaying people just for the sake.
It's not to do that.
Yeah. So I would say, I'll be honest with you. If they repeat this season, if next season is a repeat of this past season, but with let's say 4 to 6 more wins, a couple of extra overtime losses.
That's progress.
Yeah, and you introduce maybe another young player, you get a better season or another good season out of Hart. That the fans eventually will come around. Like, okay, we'll commit to you, right. And then next off season is when you're like, okay. I mean, look at what Bedard did with season tickets in Chicago, where an off season can do that. An off season can do that. Not necessarily with like a franchise generational prospect, but if you're like, hey, we're almost there. So the marketing strategy.
Yeah, and then that season 2, you'd have a Cutter Gauthier coming in potentially as well. So that'll be a big thing for them.
And again, like you said, Yariv, they have pieces in place that I don't think that what you got out of them last season was necessarily like maximum. Absolutely, that's the most you would have gotten out of them. I think that in terms of who they have and whom they're paying, if they had a couple of guys who are healthy, then yeah, why not be an 85 or 90-point team? Stranger things have happened. So,
and that's how kind of to be honest with you, Steve, that's how I see things playing out. I expect maybe one big move as far as a removal, maybe 2 big moves as far as a removal, maybe an additional young player like added to the mix when one of those guys removed. Like that's kind of what I expect. I expect the health to fix up and then to creep a little closer towards bubble territory and then hopefully clean up your cap and then make that, start making that maybe that one move where you show your fans things are about to change, right?
Yeah, like you're making a big splash in free agency.
Let me ask you guys a question.
Sure,
please.
Do you use the JVR money to buy out Ristolainen or at least part of it?
I mean, so the end of this year, he played fantastic, and Tortorella thought he was our best defender by the end of the year.
Okay.
So while he did struggle immensely in the beginning of the season, surprisingly so, because he actually was much better the previous year, and then came in was just god awful to start this year. He started off he finished really strong. So I think it really matters. I think right now he's still potentially movable. But you're not going to get anything for him, and you're going to lose that trade anyway because you traded a number 13 overall pick for him. So you're going to look stupid. So I don't know what they're going to do, but I think that's why it's so important that they go at it again before they go, oh, we're just going to bomb this roster, because there's so many guys on here that you could potentially fix. And I mean, like, fix the image of him. Like, if Ristolainen continues what he was doing, if Provorov gets back, it's like all of a sudden the value of everything goes up. I'm very
then
hesitant.
You make moves from like a position of strength almost. But.
And to that point, Steve, I'm very hesitant to do any, and to exactly what Vasili said, to make these moves from a position of weakness. Like, we're not even competitive, but let's buy out this guy. We're not competitive, but let's trade a second round pick to get rid of a guy. Like, I don't want to make anything like that. In fact, I want to make shrewd moves. I'd rather be boring and then catch a team later in the year desperate for the playoffs and then make them overpay for Kevin Hayes and then not eat anything and be like, well, you have Kevin Hayes now. And, you lost a key player you weren't expecting to, but here's Kevin Hayes for nothing. You help us. We help you. Like, that's kind of where my head is, at least.
Yeah, I think about Risto, at least with how it kind of went this season. Like, they rebuilt his game pretty much. He came in with an injury, was not very good. They benched him, and then they kind of stripped all his offensive duties essentially, and we're just really starting him in the defensive zone on the PK. We're giving him much offensive zone starts, and then slowly built that up, and he was actually contributing pretty well and rushing the puck up ice and looked decent for them in that kind of number 4 role they were playing him in. I think he competes hard, and that's obviously what Torts really likes. So I think
Torts definitely likes it.
Yeah, I think he sticks around for sure. Like, and you kind of look to rehabilitate that trade value a bit, and maybe you get out of the contract a little later in a year or two, and it becomes more palpable for other teams. But I'd say they probably stick with him this offseason, Steve, into next year.
To that point, though, just to be devil's advocate, Steve, to your point, what Vasili and I have been talking about the most is anybody who's hovering around 30, and in my opinion, that includes Scott Lawton. Anyone who's hovering around 30 is up for trade.
Depending on what comes their way, right? Like, I think Briere even said, like, they'd be stupid not to listen to anybody. So I'm sure if something comes for Ristolainen and they think to themselves, well, we're not very competitive. Do we really need him? No. Can we get rid of this cap and kind of free ourselves up in the future for more flexibility and more moves to rebuild the team? Then they'd probably do it, right? So,
because
it all depends,
and the thought is, if you're around 30, you might not be in your prime by the time we're ready.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, and a guy like Scott Lawton, I don't think they're going to move Scott Lawton, but I mean, he would get really good value.
If you get a first round pick for him, would you have to think about it? Like, who knows, right? In this draft.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's kind of where we're at with that. All right, let's get into the fun stuff, Steve. Let's talk about why you're here. Let's get into the draft. This is a really big deal for us. This is a really big deal for Flyers fans. Personally, I think we got lucky getting the number 7 pick. I think if we were healthy, we probably would have ended up in that bubble range, probably still missing the playoffs just because how competitive it is in that range. Like, we're not necessarily as good as some of those bubble teams, but we're not as bad as the bad teams, but we still managed to get the 7th pick in the draft. And in this year, we've been talking about it for a while, Steve, even from last year, talking about how strong this draft is. So I am fucking pumped. Let's put it that way. I know Vasili is too. I can already, first of all, I love how spot on you were about the Russian players. I know we're going to talk about that and how they're being treated. You nailed that 12 months ago. Just for anybody who's like, you guys can go back and listen to everything he said to a T. It has happened that way, and it is hilarious, by the way. But just, it's a huge draft for us. We only have one opportunity in the top 60 as of right now. This number 7 pick is a doozy because you're talking about off camera. Everything after 2 is a complete crapshoot right now. And let's get into it. I mean, let's just start with the top 10, then we'll get into specific questions, but let's get into your top 10. I mean, I don't know if it's changed from where it was when we last talked, but if we would just want to go through the top 10 to start, and then we can get into the Flyers specifically. But, and Vasili, did you have anything to add to what I said there? No. Okay, cool. So yeah, you want to just get into the top 10? Well, I guess we'll start off with the main man himself, the one that everybody,
all right, so no, well, if there's any change in the top 10, it's going to be on the lower half of the top 10. Definitely not the top half. Nothing's changed. So
by change, you mean it might change by the draft day?
I'm releasing a final ranking, and I move like 1 or 2 guys out and 2 guys in. But like, I did one ranking in March, based on, it was a lot of viewings, a year and a half worth. And so Bedard at 1, that's not changing. Michkov at 2, not changing. I understand people want Fantilli, and he's locked.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Let's just clarify. This is rankings, not a mock draft for anybody.
No, it's a ranking. It's a ranking. So, and I did a mock draft recently after the lottery, so we could talk about that too. But Bedard, Michkov, Fantilli, Carlson, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's what I had a year and a half ago. Not a single one of those kids gave me any reason to move them. So, it's not like I could say, well, I'm going to move Fantilli because he had all 4 of those kids had fantastic seasons. They're the 4 best prospects in this draft as far back as probably 2.5, 3 years ago. And they've done nothing to like hurt their chances, or there are no red flags. I know Michkov is the magnet for the red flags because it's like, oh, well, his father was murdered. He's going to have, emotional problems. Oh, he's a Russian contract, the KHL. Like, again, the 4 kids had phenomenal draft seasons, so they're untouched. Zach Benson is my number 5. He a smaller guy. He got hurt, and then now he's back in the with Winnipeg, the best team in the CHL.
Yeah, he's killing it in the playoffs, playing well.
Yeah, and it's a great series between them and Seattle. By the way, if you get a chance to watch it, just 2 teams loaded with first and second round picks, high picks. Guys top 10. It's crazy. Everywhere you turn, someone's on the ice. So it was a first round or second round pick. And then after that, Will Smith, the center for the NTDP, got a bump for my preseason list. So he's at 6. Dalibor Dvorsky's at 7. And he had a phenomenal U18 World Championship. All the GMs and scouts were there and they saw it. So they're all talking about him potentially being a top 5 pick. Kobe Barlow is a guy that I'm definitely bullish on. I'm going to probably knock him out of my top 10. I had him at 8. I'll probably knock him out and move Ryan Leonard into that spot at 8. And then wrapping up the top 10 was just forwards again. Braden Yeager at 9. And who did I have at 10? I think I had, let me see. Shala, whatever, the Czech kid, who's fantastic as well. So what's the biggest takeaway out of that? No defenseman. And there are going to be teams with extra first round. We have a lot of teams with lottery teams have extra first round picks. So they might, be more than happy or more than willing to draft a defenseman with that additional first. But I'd be shocked if more than one defenseman goes in the top 10. And so, the Flyers, this is the year for them. All these kids, no one did anything wrong. That I've said this on previous podcasts and spots that I was on. If you're the type of fan that locks into 3 guys and your way of being loyal to them is, red flagging and marginalizing everybody else, I disagree. I don't recommend you doing that because it's that good of a class. Like, so even if you love a guy, let's say, you have 2 or 3 guys you have in mind, that doesn't mean you should hate everybody else because it's a great draft. Okay. A lot of kids are talented. And I strongly recommend avoiding analysis paralysis, even at this phase. Whereas if you're not watching the games, you're just going by what the pundits are saying, that's fine. But just take my word for it. Like, these kids are phenomenal. And they've given us no reason to be worried or concerned, especially in the top 10.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, Steve, but I've heard a lot of that lately. I just wanted to comment because it started off where couldn't talk about last year's draft because all anybody wanted to talk about was this year's draft. All of a sudden we come to this year's draft. I cannot stop hearing, and I've heard this really consistently, is that, hey, don't get too excited about these guys. There's really only a couple impact players at the top of this draft.
There's a lot of
the other guys
players.
only project to be good players. I'm like, no, don't lie to me now. Don't tell me that this was the draft of drafts, and then we get here and you go, oh, everybody relax a little bit. And I want to talk about specifics to this draft, but this draft looks insane to me, just on a surface level, without watching the games, just based off of the surface level stats of these players. Some of this stuff blows my mind.
High production.
Well, some of these guys normally are absolutely top 5 picks, and you notice they're being like questioned as if they're even really like part of a conversation of elite
like a Perot, for example, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's a great example. I mean, he literally set the record for the NTDP. So Matthews, Eichel, Kane, and he might not even make the top 10, top 15.
So okay, let's get right into that question actually, because I didn't mean to detract, but that was one of my questions. What is going on with the USNTDP? I get that Will Smith is ranked high. The other guys ranked. I did see Bob McKenzie just kind of shot these guys up the ranking, so I have a feeling that NHL teams have these guys ranked high, but the media does not. What is going on with the USNTDP? How did these guys have a record-breaking year? From what I understand, I don't even know if year, but I believe
it was
that they put up the most points. I mean, their point per games are insane for Will Smith and what's his name, Perot, and
Leonard.
And I honestly, I don't hear a lot of buzz for anybody outside of Will Smith, and that's really just like now. Why is that? Why isn't Perot?
So it's a great year for the CHL. So the reality is that the majority of people that cover the draft are the Canadian-based outlets, and they're always gonna focus on the CHL first, and understandably so, because they provide more bodies for the draft than any other circuit. So, and this CHL group is fantastic, and not as much the Quebec League, but more so like the WHL. The WHL might have like 5 top 10 picks, with Bedard, Jaeger, Benson. Danielson might sneak in there. I know I'm forgetting one more guy too. Cristal, if people. Cristal's another guy where he was averaging almost 2 points a game.
He was ripping it up.
Jaeger also
with Jaeger with Kelowna, and people like, and I'm not that bullish on him, but some people have him ranked in like the late 20s. This kid was having a great season. So the NTDP kids, it was basically a one-line team and then a second-line center. So you had the big three. We knew about them going back to 2 years ago when they were at the selection camp. So they've been together for 2 years. They have great chemistry. They all go to Boston College together. And I'm talking about Smith, the center, and then Leonard, the right wing, and Perot, the left wing. But then you have Oliver Moore, who's a second-line center. He'd be the number one center on most NTDPs in the past. But, there's just no room. So, they destroyed everybody this year, like usually the NTDP does. But the big thing for them was they brought home the gold. Leonard scored a huge. Well, I mean, it's a golden goal, so of course it's huge.
Game winner,
So it was a perfect season, a storybook season, and the reality is that any other draft year, all 3 of those guys are going top 5, and you're talking about Smith as a potential top 3 pick, and I mean, like I said, Bob McKenzie put him on his scout poll, had him number 3 ahead of Carlson. Which is crazy to me. So they're the real deal. No one's big. I think Leonard is like 6 foot 190, so he might grow another inch. But Smith isn't a big guy. Perot's not a big guy. But again, like those 3 guys by themselves would be guaranteed top 5, top 10 picks in other drafts. But that's
what I don't understand. It's like they're out producing Logan Cooley.
That's what I mean, but I think that makes the point of like the draft, the impact, right?
Is it the depth?
Impact guys, exactly.
I saw Perot as low as 20.
Yeah, which is crazy. But that's what I mean in any of the draft.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but like, what about his game? Because to be honest with you, just sheer production-wise, surface level, I'm like, how is he not a consideration at number 7? And it doesn't seem like he is, but I want to know kind of why. Like, is he lack of defensive
about
game?
Perot specifically. Yeah. Well, he's the most one-dimensional out of the 3.
Okay, that must be.
But he's pure offense, right? And once he's inside the offensive zone, he's great. But Leonard is the heat-seeking missile, and Smith is a very good defensively responsible center, where he is always supporting his defenseman below the circles. He's engaging in puck battles, and he's a one-man breakout. But the NTDP, they had, Hudson's younger brother, Cole. They had Manishin, the kid from Jersey. I think he's from Jersey. No, he's from Jersey. And Boyum. the Israeli kid whose brother was drafted by the Red Wings. So they had puck-moving defensemen, but it's always been a forward-centric attack where the forwards have to support down low, and then they collect the puck and they initiate the breakout. Jack Hughes did it. Clayton Keller did it. Austin Matthews did it. And so that's what Smith did. Whereas with Perreault, he was just kind of waiting for things to unfold. And then once the puck crosses center, then you see the creativity. But doesn't have this like outstanding, like crazy intense compete level or defensive acumen. Okay. I say be careful with that, though. You could rate him or rank him accordingly, but be careful with that because there have been a lot of players who don't play defense and they've lit up the NHL.
Yeah, and that's come later, right? And that's what I mean.
Yeah, So,
but that makes sense. That's how a guy like Claude Giroux gets taken at 20. Right?
Yeah, that's how somebody kind of falls. Maybe it's not all there.
To brink it in the second round.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's not all there in junior, let's say, but then it comes around. I think that's a great point to make, Steve, just because you look at that and you say, like, in any other draft, those guys are top 5. So it just kind of makes the point, right? Like, look at these guys and their talent and how they're not even, potentially would be picked in the top 5. It's possible. Like, I mean, Smith probably will go, but like if you look at Leonard and Perreault, they're likely not going to be that high. So it's definitely really.
Well, Leonard, I think Leonard will be now. He might have been like, 5? Yeah, well, not top 5, but I mean maybe
like in the 5 to 10 range, you'd say, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you never know. You never know. Yeah. I mean, so I don't want to sound like I'm an expert and I know how the draft's going to unfold because I don't. But like because teams, they have a scouting combine coming up. So let's just say Perreault, like Josh Norris, right? Josh Norris and TDP #1 center, right? Yep. Wasn't really that heralded, but we knew that he was the best center on a pretty mediocre NTDP, and he knocked it out of the park at the combine, and he gets drafted in the first round, but like kind of late, and he's a fantastic play for us.
Exactly, yeah.
Like everything you kind of want in a #2 center. So there's still, like I said, the combine will have a say in the interview process, etc. But I mean,
stacked draft for sure.
All those GMs that were at the U18 Worlds, and listen, they're so busy dealing with contracts and trying to build a playoff roster, etc. That they usually look at the U18s as like, all right, now I'm going to hit the scouting trail. And I'm going to go and and it was in Switzerland this year. So a lot of GMs took the time out. They went to Europe. They were there with their scouting directors. And look what they saw. They saw the 3 NTDP guys have a dominant tournament. They saw Dvorsky have a dominant tournament. The Swedish kids, Sandy Palika, Otto Stenberg, like on and on and on. Even Haltunen, the Finnish kid who didn't do much in the regular season in the adult league in Finland, but he had a strong tournament for the Finns. So all it takes is one, the GM might have his mind made up and say, go to the scouting director and say, hey, this is the kid I want.
Like, exactly, based on what you see. In terms of like risers, fallers, Steve, I was kind of wondering, like, do you think Michkov is going to be obviously the big faller here in this draft coming up? Or I personally think, I mean, if you're a team and you're not taking him in the top 3, you're out of your mind just based on the skill level, but you obviously hear with everything going on that he might fall. So what's your opinion on that?
I don't think he'll fall, and I'll tell you why I don't think he's going to fall that far. It's pretty basic, okay? Every team doing the drafting outside of Bedard at #1, they've either drafted Russians early or they've taken the chance on Russians without caring much about the contract. So, like, for example, look at, first of all, like Washington. They clearly have no problem drafting Russians. They drafted Miroshnichenko last year. I know Ovechkin's there right now. He's going to stay there until he breaks the record. So, Arizona, who's their GM? Armstrong. Armstrong drafted Tarasenko in 2010 when he was with the Blues. And everybody was saying, oh, Tarasenko, the Russian factor. And he ended up drafting him. It was a beautiful move. So what's it called? Anaheim drafted Mintyukov. Now, of course, he's an import, but he was also with the, playing in the Russian system. He ended up coming over, and listen, he was one of the best defense prospects in the game. Who's Columbus? Columbus drafted an overage Russian, Chinakov, in the first round. So there's really no reason to think that any of these teams, especially when they have multiple first-round picks. Detroit has 2 first-round picks, right? And they drafted a kid, Buchelnikov, in the 2nd round last year as an overager. He was one of the top goal scorers in the Russian league. He was Michkov's line mate for 2 years. They're best friends. If you go to their Instagram, they're always like pounding around with each other. So you tell me Detroit be like, oh, I don't want Michkov. Detroit is I think the one wild card when it comes to Michkov, because they don't really necessarily need wings, but they're loaded at every position. They drafted their center need. They addressed it last year. So to answer your question, no, I don't see him falling out of the top 10. If he falls to 4, 5, 6, it's really not an indictment on the player himself. But remember that there's also the political aspect where teams have been told, don't draft this kid. Maybe something comes up where they're worried about the controversy with his father being murdered. I don't know, but there's going to be one team that's going to say, no freaking way, not on my watch. Yeah. I am not going to be the GM who allowed a potential Ovechkin slip through my fingers because of politics or a contract.
I think it's insane, and I don't know if you follow up on football at all, but obviously here at the Eagles, they just landed a guy, Jalen Carter, who was ranked
at the draft.
And again, this is a team who didn't have, they had the luxury, they could take the risk if he was a risk, but everybody's like, he won the draft. Like, if I think about the Flyers, let's just say Michkov falls to 7,
they'd be out of their mind, man.
I'm saying if the Flyers draft him, right, they draft him at 7. He will be the most talented player that this team has drafted. I mean, you could say since Claude Giroux, though we didn't.
He was a late first-round pick.
But you didn't know that.
Yeah,
it's really Peter Forsberg at 6, and we didn't even really know that Forsberg was going to be what he is.
And they traded him. So.
This is a potential generational talent for the Flyers. Yeah. I agree with Steve. You have to be out of your mind. That's why I keep 100%. Thinking that a lot of this is media-driven.
Yes.
I just can't see it. Like, I think you have to be nuts to pass this guy, even though the other guys are really strong candidates. He is, again, it's not a question like, oh, I heard like the Filatov stuff, like, that's not what this guy is. This is a guy who could right now in the NHL be a top scorer, right? Is that crazy to say that he could score 30 goals in the NHL today at 18 years old? Is that crazy?
He might. And the other thing too is that he's the only player in this draft who went toe-to-toe with Bedard and outproduced him and outperformed him.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Like I said on previous episodes, like it's a shame what's all happened with the politics because like you never got to see these two kind of go head-to-head and kind of like cement like, okay, which guy, is going to outproduce one another. Not to say like Michkov would have done that to Bedard, but he did it in previous, situations. So who knows what would have happened out of World Juniors, let's say. So it's just a crazy dynamic for a guy like that, to potentially drop in this scenario for me.
Well, like, I get it. Listen, I get it. And,
you called it.
Yeah.
but it's unfair because does the NBA treat a player like that?
No.
That way? Does the NFL treat a player like that way? Yeah, we have guys that fall, but can you imagine like what was his name? Andrew Luck, in recent years, I think in terms of generational quarterbacks, right? Was Luck? Am I missing someone? But Luck to me was like they're like he's the next Peyton Manning. He's the next because I know Manning for a fact was generational. They knew that, but they said the same about Ryan Leaf. But with Luck, I felt like the hype around him was so great. Can you imagine, like in the entire draft year, people are like, well, Luck, he's not going to be ready to be a star in 4 years, and hockey is the only.
It's like Evgeny Malkin being in the draft and pretending like it's not a big deal.
Yeah, pretty much.
I get. Listen, like hockey, the way hockey draft coverage goes, it's so weird. Where like the most anticipated ranking that we all wait for is by a guy who doesn't even watch the damn kids play. Is by a guy that just
Bob McKenzie, you mean?
And God bless him. Listen, that's what he does. He's a journalist,
and he's honest about it, at least.
Yeah, and then the second guy only watches tournaments. He goes to a tournament, he covers it, and Craig
Button, for those who are not aware.
But think about it, Craig Button is not just they call him the director of scouting, but he also covers the Maple Leafs. He does NHL games.
Yeah, he does a lot.
He is not fully invested into watching these kids on a consistent basis. Okay, he goes, he watches tournaments. Listen, he's got bird's eye view. His dad created Central Scouting, so clearly he's knowledgeable and he has the ability to assess players. But let's be honest here. There's so many layers to these kids from the beginning of their draft year until the very end. And
so many intricacies.
And so Michkov, the talk was his defense isn't good, and people I saw one ranking had him at 15.
When he when he could score as much as he can, I don't think the defense matters, right?
Yeah, most of these kids suck at defense.
Yeah,
but I mean, the point is that
kids come ready to play it.
It became political.
The NHL, yeah. Sorry.
Here's the thing. We could just wrap this Michkov talk up real simple, okay? The political discussion surrounding the Ukraine war and the IIHF ban on everything essentially made it fashionable to marginalize Michkov's generational accomplishments that he accomplished at 14, 15, and 16.
Crazy.
But when he went and he was scrutinized, he went to the KHL and destroyed it, right? The KHL, the second or third best league in the world. He went and he destroyed it. And everybody had no choice but to go back and correct the errors that they made in marginalizing him based off of a political or concern. Now, if you're a draft analyst or you're a talent evaluator, you have to separate between making a mock draft. You want to be right because you want the draft to unfold a certain way so you could be right, or do you want to predict the 5, 10, 15 top plays of the draft 5, 10 years down the road? That's what I do. And that's what I think people in the NFL and the NBA do as well. With hockey, no, it's all about let's predict the draft. And that's why you get, all the negativity surrounding a guy like Michkov.
Where do you think Michkov will end up falling, in the end here? If you had to, make a guess, you'd think.
So I've been analyzing it for a while now. I've done all my draft previews for the lottery teams. So I can tell you right now, obviously, Chicago, to me, if they didn't win, they were taking him at 3. Unless Kyle Davidson, the GM, was playing a little deception game there. I thought, based on his comments, because the at the press conference, they were asking him about Michkov, and he said his exact words were, "I'm not taking a guy off my draft board just because he's not going to be ready in 2 or 3 or 4 years." As were his exact words. So I thought that Michkov at 3 would have been perfect. One Bedard to Anaheim or Columbus, Fantilli next to 2. Michkov is at 3. San Jose has a lot of wings. I don't know. I mean, he'll be obviously the best player in their pool if they get him, and he's NHL ready, but he can't play right now. So I think they'll pass. I think they're going to go for the Swedish kid Carlson if he's available. Montreal, they have a Russian director of scouting. They drafted the wing Slavkovsky. I think they go for Dvorsky to have that Slovakian counterpart down there, and he addresses a need. So now we're past the top 5. I don't see Michkov going in the top 5. Arizona is where I have him going because Arizona went center heavy last year. They drafted Geeky and Cooley in the first round, the 2 top 12 picks. They have their farm system's just growing and growing and growing. They have a bunch of picks this year, and they need a marquee name. They need a franchise type guy. Remember, they also try to attempt to get Austin Matthews as well. Mm-hmm. So you could entertain the idea of Matthews centering Michkov. I mean, so Arizona would be a great spot for Michkov. He's out of the limelight. There's not going to be a whole lot of pressure on him. The media, listen, he's going to be playing a 5,000 seat arena, which then means that he's not going to be available to the Flyers. And I think it makes the decision for Fleur and his scouts a little bit easier. But again, I can make it, like I said, St. Louis at 10, the Red Wings at 9, Washington at 8. All those teams make sense for Michkov as well. So I don't see him dropping out of the top 10.
It'd be so crazy to watch him drop that low because I've never seen a player that talented
drop for that reason. Yeah. In that manner, I guess. Another thing too, Steve, I mean, obviously we kind of talk about the fall, the fallers here, who could fall. And I mean, Michkov's the hot topic. In terms of risers, do you see anybody maybe rising up that wouldn't have been in the top 10 beforehand or earlier?
Well, listen, if you want to try to predict the draft, you're going to make maybe a defenseman like Ryan Bacher, who's playing right now in the Worlds, the Austrian defenseman. I think he's the best defenseman in the draft, although Sandy Palika and Gulyayev, the Russian kid, aren't very far behind him. All three are very, very high IQs. So, I would not, and I've been saying this for a while, I would not draft for need. If you have a need for a defenseman, this is not the draft to address it, okay? You address it. There's no way. Next year's draft is loaded with the Fizade Perek, the Dickinson kid in London. There's a lot of defensemen. So this is not the draft to address a need. I know people say, well, look at what Yzerman did with Morris Seider. I mean, he needed a defenseman. He overdrafted him apparently by like 10 picks. Okay, fine. But look at the players that were taken after him. Zegras, Boldy, Cousins. These are established star forwards, young star forwards in the NHL. I'm not saying it was a bad pick. I'm just saying that
they were great players in that. Yeah.
When you have the forwards are just so plentiful and they're talented and they're I think they have a short runway. I don't think they're going to be in junior hockey or in the AHL all that long.
It's crazy. We might not see a defenseman go in the top 10. I think that's.
I think it happened like one at a time. But as far as the reason why I don't think you're going to see anyone rising into that top 10 is because the established top 10, the consensus top 10, Central Scouting's top 10, if you combine the Euro and the North American list, is that these kids haven't done anything wrong. They haven't played poorly. They all had strong postseasons. So it's not like you can look at a guy and be like, that guy who, like whether it be Jaeger, but people were knocking Jaeger down because he decided that he wanted to be more of a playmaker than a shooter this season as opposed to last. And he went out and for Musha had a fantastic playoff run and really, strutted his stuff, I thought, on a big stage. So I don't really see anybody. There might be a surprise. I don't know. But I would not mess with fate. I would not be the smartest guy in the room. Oh, like I said, analysis paralysis. Like, this guy came out of nowhere and had a good last month of the season. No, do not do that. Don't do that. This is not the time to do it. And I give everybody permission to yell and be mad at the GM, the scouting director if they do.
I like that. So let's talk about the guy that you did have the Flyers taking in the mock draft. And I've seen in pretty much every mock draft outside of the ones that labeled Dvorsky. And I want to talk about him next. But Ryan Leonard has been listed quite a bit. On paper, obviously looks very interesting. Clearly looks like a Tortorella guy. I think you call it.
Yeah.
I saw him compared to as a bigger version of Travis Konecny. I don't know if that's true. I've seen him labeled as a right wing, left wing, a center. I don't know exactly. I don't think he played center this past year, but I will say this. In my opinion, the Flyers need to go all out and get a center. If it's not Michkov, which is an unforgettable talent, I believe they need a center. They need a play-driving center. But I'm seeing Ryan Leonard everywhere. Why Ryan Leonard? What's awesome about this guy?
All right, so I get it. Like the Flyers have only drafted 5 natural centers in the last 5 years. Okay,
they almost all of them.
They have to draft centers. They have to address it. Now I know that Gauthier. I didn't count Gauthier in that because he was drafted as a wing and he played center at Boston College. So, again, like they can address the need and get the best player available. So if they don't go Dvorsky, listen, Jaeger, his comparable is, in my opinion, is Braden Shen. And so that's not a bad pick at 7th overall. You know what I mean? I know that, the Flyers, ended up moving on from him, but there are a bunch of centers in that area. The question is, though, is like a guy like Leonard, he's like an automatic game changer. You know what I mean? He's an automatic he's a momentum swing because he could skate, he could hit, and he could create his own shot as a goal-scoring wing. So, I would say out of all the guys in the top 10, 15, he might be the most physical. But just like, I guess a question to ask is, what is Ryan Leonard without Will Smith, right? Will Smith has probably after Bedard and I would say after Bedard, he probably has like the purest vision and creativity, like pure playmaking out of anybody in the draft after Bedard. So what is Ryan Leonard without Will Smith? And I can tell you right now, the games that I watched where Will Smith was not at the top of his game, Leonard was. So I never really got the impression. Perot, different story. I thought that he really needed those two to get to where he got to, whereas Leonard, that was not the case. And I think that's why he shot up. Like I had him like at 25, 24 in my preseason ranking. And then within about like a week or two of the regular season, you see him playing against the college kids. Yeah. Also, his brother is in NHL, John Leonard, playing for the Sharks. And I think he got traded to Nashville. But, to see him play like that under like tough circumstances, to be a self-starter. And then again, like, if Torts has a say, now, okay, he's got to go to Boston College.
He definitely sounds like a Torts player for sure.
He's going to Boston College.
Yeah.
Who's already at Boston College?
Gauthier.
So it's like...
we did talk about this, yeah.
Yeah, so it saves... You could pitch it to Comcast and say, we're saving a lot of money because we can see our two best prospects in the same rink.
And also you have the chemistry factor too. They might play together, all that type of stuff.
No, they're not going to play together because the whole line is...
the whole line's going. That's true, yeah.
The whole line's going, so... It's
probably going to be... Perot.
I mean, listen, you never know, but so that's why, again, I know that they're loaded at wing. They got really promising seasons out of Forster down in the farm, and then of course Tippett with the big club. So they have Bobby Brink. I mean, he's still, when healthy, he's one of the better pure, I guess, playmakers from the wing. Samu Tuomala had a fantastic year in the Mestis in Finland. I was one of the top scorers in that league. He's scoring goals at will. So I get that they have plenty of wings. And I don't know, maybe they could try to turn Leonard into a center. I just think, why would you mess with that? He's basically a Corvette from the wing that basically like could run you over like freaking Bigfoot, like a monster truck, because he really does hit hard. And so the combination
he kind of reminds me of a Mike Richards, the way you're explaining him.
He's a better skater. Yeah. He's a better skater. He's a better skater.
But the compete's there, obviously. You would say.
Yeah. So Richards to me was like the ultimate. The intangibles, the leadership. There was so many layers to his game. Whereas and Leonard has those layers too. It's just that he's a pure wing,
more pure skill. You would say.
They were both really skilled. Leonard to me is like I'm trying to think. I mean, he's just like I said, he's a fast physical wing who hits like hard.
It's like a bigger Marchand, it sounds like, right? Because that's like the comparison of that physical winger who can score.
I'm trying to think. I'm drawing a blank when it comes to like comparables. But
that's okay. They don't always work anyway.
Yeah, like
that's why I heard Travis Konechny was the one that I heard. Just he's bigger than
Konechny. Well, Konechny, because you get the effort and the hustle.
Yeah.
But I don't know if how often do you see Travis Konechny changing the momentum of a game like all the time? Like
this year a lot. Prior to that,
but again, injuries played a role in that. But it's like Leonard is a guy where it's almost like he was like Sean Avery, but Avery had a lot of skill. He was just a jerk, and his head was never always in the game. But like when Sean Avery was at his peak, and it wasn't like Leonard's like a dirty player and agitator. It's just that like he jumps over the boards and he's going 1,000 miles an hour,
cruise missile.
And so. Again, I think that kind of player where you can't even say that he's grading intangibles because he's an elite scorer. So any other year, like I said, this guy's a top 5 pick guaranteed. And I just think that the effort, the physicality, the size, you name it. And then Gauthier is a very good playmaker. He's got excellent vision. He's a clean, crisp passer. So imagine those two playing catch in a power play, where they both have the cannons and of course Gauthier when he's more strategic with his physicality, but he could be physical. and he also offers a two-way play as well. So these are all the things that went into my mind when I was doing the mock draft. Sure. Whereas Dvorsky, I think he's going to be gone, but obviously if he's there, you're getting a potential number one center or number
decision for the Flyers too between I'd say Dvorsky and Leonard if that was it, right?
Well, but I think the decision's probably going to be made for them. I think that's where I was leaning when I was doing my mock draft. I think like everything is going to be made. Like they're not going to have to once you get Michkov off the board and Dvorsky off the board, and But then if you're going to go wing, well, what about Zach Benson? He's a smaller guy, but he plays exactly like Leonard. He hits. He maybe sometimes too much, and he was one of the top. I think he was the second or third scorer in the WHL before he got hurt. So
very
Leonard,
shifty, dynamic player from what I saw.
Yeah, dynamic offense. He drove that top line with Savoy, who was a first-round pick on.
Yeah, exactly. They played together. And they were dynamite. Yeah, really.
Yeah, good. And so Savoy's now so now you're watching the playoffs. It's both of them. So again, not an easy decision to make, but there's no way I go with a defenseman. There's no way. No way. Now
I agree. I think that'd be a mistake.
The Flyers, if I read it correctly, the Flyers are going to get a second-round pick this year because they didn't sign Jay O'Brien, and we
don't know. We don't know for sure if it's this year or next year, and Danny Briere doesn't even know. Apparently, so the word behind it is that Jay O'Brien needs to file for free agency before the draft. I don't know if he did that,
or if that's in the works.
Well, they're not offering him a contract.
Correct. Right? So if he does that, and he does it before that date, then we get it this year.
So Philip Johansson was in the same draft. He was a defenseman that the Wild took, and it was a bad pick. And so then when Guerin took over with Brackett, they decided not to give him a contract, and that decision was made last year, and the Wild received a compensation pick in last year's draft.
I hope it works out that way. We need
if they do, it'll be 51. It'll be the 51st pick of round 2 of overall because I think it was like an 18th pick, so just the 18th pick or 19th pick of the second round. That's what the Flyers are going to get. But even still, if not, they still get 2 seconds, 2 thirds, and 2 fourths, right?
Maybe they can move up there potentially. Yeah.
So you could address defense there. You could get there's a very deep goalie draft, so the Flyers could address goaltending as well if they feel like they need to. But with the top, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Steve. What do you think about to go back to these Russians? And I've been talking about this about not ignoring because of what I'm noticing these patterns that you've been saying to me for the past few years.
European players.
And I brought up like Mikko Rantanen the other day. How I didn't know Mikko Rantanen was going to be what he was. I didn't watch him even as much. Yeah. And again, we're all on the outside. We're fans, right? Like you're doing this always. We're trying to catch up now desperately. We don't have footage on Michkov. We don't really have a lot of this stuff. We don't know players are that great. And I'm just wondering, in this third and fourth round with these political issues, is this an opportunity to take some Russians? Are there any Russians around that range that you think might drop out of the second round, make it to the third, where that's an opportunity? Because I didn't know if maybe there's some additional, because I haven't heard anything about any Russians outside of Michkov.
It's not a deep Russian class this year. Okay. Last year was deep. This year's classes are very deep. One of the top Russian kids is like 5'7" after Michkov. So you have a couple of good defensemen in Golyayev and Simashev. But Golyayev definitely should be a first-round pick. He's fantastic. Maybe the best skater in the draft between he and Sandy Palika in terms of defensemen. But there's Zavragin, the goalie. He's pretty good. So, the Flyers have drafted goalies out of Russia before. Kolosov, I think, was drafted. He's Belarus, but he was drafted, I think, out of the KHL or the MHL, whatever league it was.
I can't remember. I think you're right.
Yeah. So it's just not like the Russian class that is really next year. You might have 2 top 5 picks in. Demidov could be first overall pick. The left wing for the Scott program. And then
that's not going to happen now.
Well, yeah. I mean, no. Well, this one is
talent-wise. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, I mean, he's really good. He's like a playmaking wing who hits hard. It's like crazy. But no, I don't. It's not. So here's the way that conclusions I've come to in terms of all the leagues. Not a good year for Finland, but you'll get good talent. specifically out of forwards in rounds 2 and 3. Sweden, a decent year for Swedish forwards. Pretty good year for their defensemen. They might have 3 in the first round, one guy coming in late. The Czech group, not very deep, right? Slovakian group, not very deep. Only a couple here and there. So this is just and even the NTDP itself, not very deep. I saw they want to put this kid, Danny Nelson, a converted defenseman, a forward who used to be a defenseman, into the second round, maybe even first round. No. They have 4 first-round talents, and then that's it. So, not a good high school crop. Minnesota high school crop, not bad. This is the year for the CHL. It's kind of like 2020.
Yeah.
Where it's like the Quebec League, they got a couple of guys. Ethan Gauthier, the forward. Etienne Morin, very good defenseman. He might make the first round. But really, this is all about the OHL and the WHL. Those kids are fantastic. I love them. And so you're going to see, and again, all those other leagues like the USHL, etc., it's not like really down years for them. It's just that the CHL group is so strong that it's going to push first-round talent into the middle of the second round, and maybe even late first-round talent into the late second, early third. And when you talk about the depth of a draft, and what metrics do you use? My metrics are very simple. Where do they rank on their team? Like where their role in the team and where they rank. How well do they do if they're European? How well do they do in the adult leagues? And then like what type of their performances on like an international tournament, etc. And all these kids, most of the kids that we have earmarked for the first round, they've all hit those benchmarks. So when you have a draft that you're comparing to 2003 or 2015, 2 of the best drafts in the history of the league, then look who's drafted in the second and third rounds of those drafts, right? The Shea Webbers, the Patrice Bergerons,
lots of hidden gems, exactly.
Yes,
Sebastian Ahos. So you're going to find them. You're going to find them. I mean, look, Kaprizov was a 5th round pick in 2015, and he's one of the top players in the NHL. There's always a chance that the Flyers are going to make moves and add more picks. I agree to it. And actually, when I heard about the O'Brien thing, I said that's a smart move because Jay O'Brien, as good as he is, and as nicely as he progressed, I guess eventually after transferring to BU, is that Jay O'Brien late in round 1 in 2018 is not as, let's say, asset-wise, like worth-wise, isn't worth as much as a freaking 51st pick in this particular draft.
Yeah, it's that deep, right?
That's the way that I look at it. So, but to answer your question about the Russians, it's just not a deep draft.
The one thing I want to see the Flyers do is I wouldn't mind an aggressive, like I'm not thinking numbers games with this one. I'm thinking move up and get your guys. Like you need to move up and get your guys.
Well, they have 2/3, 2/4, right? So if you package some of those together to move up potentially, you obviously have to be there for you, but we'll see what unfolds on the draft day, right? Draft floor.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, like they have a pretty deep system. Right defense is not. They need to address right defense at some point. I don't know when. Left defense, no. Definitely not wing. It's just center and right
D, yeah.
And then even like if you want to say goaltending.
Goaltending's pretty stacked, to be honest.
I know, listen, with Fedotov, I don't even know what's happening with him. It's a shame what happened to him.
He's not, the latest word is that he's never coming to the NHL.
He's going to play
that's what we just heard.
They gave him a shot in like a press room, and they gave him the needle, and that's it.
And that's it. Yep.
Shame. He was so good in that KHL final too. But
and the Olympics as well, even.
Ursan, like I guess if you want to go like Hart, Sandstrom, right?
Ursan, yeah.
Kolosov is pretty good.
Yeah.
But again, you don't want to ignore the goalie depth in this draft.
I think they'll take I could see them taking one goalie of the pick
for sure. Yeah.
Just because you always want to have a stack.
You always take a goalie.
Yeah.
You always take a goalie too.
If there's
after a while, right?
Yeah, especially in that mid range.
Yeah. But like I said, like if they're sellers and they add more draft capital and they want to say, well, look at Columbus, look at Montreal, look at Arizona, look at St. Louis. All these teams have tons of picks this year, and a lot of them in the higher rounds, right? The first, second, and third round. So I guess the O'Brien decision is going to somewhat weigh into the moves that they make, because you definitely want to add. I definitely would not trade down in the first round to get more picks. Pick you do not touch.
I agree.
So
I would only move up, and I don't think it's possible to move up past 5.
Yeah.
So it would still take a lot to move up 2 picks. So
I mean, let's just say one hypothetical scenario is that there are teams in love with Michkov, and he's available to the Flyers at 7, and the Flyers are like, well, we love Leonard, and you have to guess. You say, well, we'll drop down. Let's say Detroit wants to move up, and they can do it because St. Louis has those 2 extra first round picks. They want Michkov. That's a situation where you would be a bad move, but
might entertain it. Yeah,
from 7 to 15, or no one does that anymore anyway.
I'd be very disappointed to see them move back at all, because I really just want them to grab the best. Like, I want Dvorsky.
Take BPA.
Yeah. I want Dvorsky. I want Will Smith. I don't know if it's possible, but in my mind, I'm like, this team needs a dynamic center.
Yeah.
I was like, I know we need it.
Or generational guy in a Michkov.
Right.
Something like that.
I make the exception because Michkov's ridiculous. So
yeah.
I wouldn't even I don't care. If Bedard was a winger, I would draft him. It wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the final segment. We'll get ready to wrap up because Vasili does have some work to do after this as well. And even though I'd love to go all the way until midnight talking about hockey.
Very fun stuff, always.
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, but we're going to do, for those who are not aware, we're going to do another follow-up with Steve closer to the draft too. We'll get deeper either before or after, we'll figure it out. All right, let's get into playoff wrap-ups. Steve, Vasili and I have been talking about this stuff, but the second round has wrapped up. We find ourselves in an interesting position this year because I don't think this was that predictable, but at the same time, I would say everybody but Florida, to me, are where they should be. I don't think it played out exactly the way I thought it would, but you got Dallas left. They beat Seattle in 7, right? In a tight game where they win 2-1. Vegas wins their series 4-2. Carolina wins their series 4-1. Excuse me. And Florida wins their series 4-1, which I think is the real surprise there. But I guess let's go to Florida first. A team that is reminiscent of what the Flyers did years ago. The momentum that they have right now. I'd be surprised if they beat Carolina. But it's, when you have this kind of momentum and confidence, I think it's kind of possible. Steve, I want to go to you first, but I also want your thoughts on the Leafs. And Vasili is in Toronto, so we've already talked about this, but kind of what are your thoughts about what Florida is doing, and do you see them, having a chance here to win?
Well, what's surprising with Florida isn't that, because remember they were the President's Trophy winners last year.
Yeah, really good.
They were a steamroller, and
the best team.
they played. They really should have beaten Tampa Bay last year, but frickin' Vasilevsky was out of his mind in round 2. So, but what happened? Look at what happened after that. Like the coach, they have to fire him because the DUI video comes out, and then their goalie of the future, Knight, has to leave the team for personal reasons. And then before that, they make the trade. They get rid of Huberdeau and what's his name?
Uyghur.
Mackenzie Uyghur, yeah.
Yeah, and so they did not have a good regular season. Bobrovsky was good, but he still wasn't like a $10 million goalie. And then, they had the most an insurmountable task, but Bobrovsky did it again by beating Boston. So I'm not surprised by it. They got Duclair coming back from injury, definitely helped them late in the season. He was a big part of their success last year. And they have guys playing out of their minds.
Yeah, Kachuk, just look at him.
Maurice is a defensive-minded coach. I call him Mr. Personality. The guy has no personality, but he has taken multiple teams on deep runs. He did it with Carolina way back when in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
He did it with Winnipeg, and they upset the President's Trophy winner in I think it was Nashville that year. So he's done it before. And so it's not really that much of a surprise in that regard, but still, once they upset Boston, though, I think anything was open. As far as the Leafs go, I I'm shocked. I really am surprised at how they just didn't show up for the series. How they were held to 2 goals a game in every game. They went in the postseason. They went 1-5 at home, and of course Matthews not scoring a freaking goal in round 2.
Yeah.
I am not going to blame Dubas. I said I did a podcast about. I'm not blaming Dubas. He did everything in his power. He shifted his philosophy. He stopped being stubborn. He went for the physicality, and he gave up a favor to his in Sandin. He's built a pretty good farm system, but everything was to the outside. And if that's the case, you got to put that on the coach a little bit. But really disappointed in how the Leafs went. Like I felt like, because I didn't even think they played that well against Tampa. I felt like they got lucky, but sometimes you need luck to break these jinxes. But man, to the way that they played against Florida, I didn't think they played well at all. There's no way to sugarcoat it. They didn't play well. They could have played a lot better. And maybe it starts with Shanahan. Maybe you got rid of Shanahan, but you got to get rid of at least one of those guys. Their core plays, except Riley. Definitely don't get rid of Riley. And give Dubas another shot. But
I think they're gonna fire Keith personally.
You kind of have to, man.
You have
to. Yeah, they didn't make the necessary adjustments to kind of like stick with Florida, right? So
yeah, but even if let's say he did make adjustments, like dude, like you're a 50-win team every year, and you only have one playoff round. See,
like the success just isn't there. Some change has to happen when the results aren't there. I think for Florida, it's not too surprising. Obviously, President's Trophy last year. I think you see it with a lot of these teams that have great success in the regular season. Sometimes they have to learn to lose in the playoffs, and based off those mistakes, they take that and kind of progress. I mean, we've seen it with Tampa Bay, we've seen it with Colorado, so it's not too surprising, especially when you have guys like a Barkov. I mean, Ekblad's a stud on defense, and Montour's been really great. Plus, you have Kachuk. I mean, is kind of just doing everything for them. He's physical. He's mixing it up after the scrubs. He's scoring. Yeah. And then, I mean, you add I think Bennett's been really good too, underrated just in a lot of games, just with like the crucial, the kind of defensive zone stuff he's been doing, plus just mixing it up and being physical as well. So like they're really good. I mean, the Florida series is going to be a really, really good series. Obviously, Carolina's back end is insane. I mean, they're missing some guys up front, but they've been able to score really well throughout the playoffs even without them. So I think it's going to be a really great series, and it might come down to Bobrovsky versus Anderson and Ranta there. Yeah. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, it'll be a good series.
Who do you guys take, Carolina or Florida?
I'm going to take Carolina, but I think it's going to be 7 games. I think it's going to be a very close series.
Steve?
Carolina too, because I don't know how the hell they're doing it. They're getting Teravainen back.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's a big one for them.
Yeah. But yeah, they've had like some pretty bad defeats postseason wise. Their goal has always been to win the cup. Since
that would be like a kind of learning from your mistakes thing, because they've lost in the second round multiple times in the last couple of years.
Yeah. So but personnel wise, like it's pretty even.
Yep.
But Bobrovsky, this is his first taste, like to come this close to the cup. So it'll be a good series. I don't know. I mean, look, Southeast teams, the old Southeast Division.
Yep, I know, right?
Yeah. But both teams deserve to be there. There's no like fluke or anything like that. Like what Carolina did to Carolina dismantled the Devils.
The Devils. Oh yeah,
they dismantled them. Like it was,
It was pretty masterful. That's the reason they're right now my cup favorites, just because they haven't missed a beat this playoffs.
Yeah, no.
Where the other teams look like maybe at time. Well, actually, maybe that's not fair because of Vegas, but I just think like Carolina never looked like they weren't going to win.
Yeah, whereas series. I personally I had Dallas as like my favorite, but like there was times where they weren't really themselves and were kind of underperforming.
Yeah.
Whereas Carolina didn't do that at all.
Not even a little bit. I did expect New Jersey. This again, I hate that this is a young man's game statement, and New Jersey is a perfect example why I don't like that statement, because there's a reason that it's not a young man's game.
Well, they're gaining the experience. Like I can see them learning from this.
They're very talented. I would argue if they were a veteran team, would have been even. They might win the Stanley Cup if they're a veteran team with what they have.
My theory with the Devils is very simple. Half that team were playing for contracts, so they had the extra motivation, and it helped them against the Rangers, who have no one really up for contract.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it.
It's like, I'm not going to take away the talent the Devils have, but very surprised to see Toronto, the way Toronto and Carolina, Toronto and New Jersey went out.
Yeah,
man,
I thought it'd be closer. I mean, I had Toronto beating the Panthers last round.
That was my conference final. I had the Devils. I'm like, the Devils and the Leafs are just going to roll and roll and roll, and that's why I try to tell people, like, you can't say, well, it was a successful season because we had, like, no, dude, like, you laid an egg in round 2, and like you had a chance to go to the conference finals and you didn't. So
yeah, they won't forget that, because sometimes you assume that you'll get another crack at it next year,
but you might not always happen.
Maybe your season's not as successful, or maybe you're, maybe
it could be injuries.
The first round is much better.
You never know, right?
Yeah. So, all right, let's go over to the West. For me, these were my picks. I did have Vegas coming out of their end and playing Dallas. I did have Dallas going to the finals. I'll be honest, now looking at it, I'm going to take Vegas in this one. I think Vegas takes it in potentially 6, but I'll do 7 just to be safe. But I think it's very close. I mean, I'd actually give Dallas the edge in talent, maybe, but depth and just defensive acumen, I give to Vegas. So I don't know. I'll take Vegas here. Steve, we'll go with you. What do you think about the Dallas?
Go to Vasili first because he's got to go.
Okay, yeah, sure.
That's true. I would say I feel for Vegas, Dallas. I mean, it's going to be a close one. I had Dallas versus Colorado, and obviously nobody really saw Seattle kind of beating them there. But not surprised to see Vegas make it this far. They've been a really good team. I do have Dallas. I'm going to stick with them. I had them going to the Cup, so I'll stick with my pick. I think it'll be Dallas, though, if they do it in 7 as well. Like, I think these are going to be both really close series. I think they're pretty evenly matched.
All four teams, I would say, are evenly matched.
Yeah, like there isn't really a big disparity in terms of talent, I would say, between either team. What I look at, I'm going to go back to it because, like, I mean, I'm usually the goalie person. I look at the goalies right now for Vegas. I'm not sure what's happening there. I mean, Aiden Hill was in for them. I don't know if what's going on with Brossoit. I mean, they'll likely stick with Hill here. I think Ottinger, I mean, is the better goalie, and I think with him, I mean, he's kind of rounding into form. Wasn't the greatest last series, but I think he gets it together and kind of gets Dallas into the finals there.
All right, Steve.
My predictions have been terrible. This postseason, I've been just wrong and wrong.
The East, I was very, very wrong. Don't worry.
The only thing I was right about was freaking the Islanders losing to Carolina. That was it. Everything else I've been freaking wrong. But Vegas was a team I was never really down on. So I'm not surprised at what they're doing. But I don't know. I think eventually the goaltending situation, like you talked about, Vasili, is going to catch up with them. That Ottinger, like, although he hasn't been perfect, but I like the fact that they're getting veteran scoring. They have an experienced mobile defense, and they have that deadly top line. So I think when you cancel everything out, although Vegas might have an edge in experience and also in playoff experience, I think Ottinger is going to be, like, if it comes down to a game 6 or game 7 deciding game, my money's on Ottinger. So my Cup's going to be Dallas and Carolina. I think I picked Carolina. Yeah, Dallas and Carolina, and then I think Carolina is going to finally do it. Yeah, first time for 06.
Yeah, I could see Carolina winning. I think they're my favorite this year.
Is that your pick as well, Yariv? Carolina?
Yeah, Carolina. I think.
Okay, I see Dallas, Carolina too, but I'm going to switch it up and go Dallas.
Wow, I'd like to see Dallas win. They were my first.
Jamie Benn with the
Cup, and I want to see Pavelski win as well, right? Like, he's a guy who's looking for one, but it'd be
Ryan
Carolina.
Suter.
Suter as well. Carolina would be a great story to see Brent Burns win too. So,
yeah, it's true. Brent Burns, good point.
So there's a lot of good stories with that final. I think ends up being that.
Carolina can thank D'Angelo for leaving. That's why they're going to win.
It's funny because they have Gostisbehere now. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they come full circle, and they.
But you know what? It's been a great playoffs. Like you can say, right? Like, if you look at the NHL playoffs in terms of predicting how it's going to unfold, in terms of other playoffs, I mean, NBA has been pretty unpredictable too. But it's crazy just to see the parity in the league is.
I love it.
Awesome.
All All right, let's wrap up on that. Steve, anything you want to tell people about? Maybe, shout out for maybe your work with the draft that they should follow.
Just head over to my Substack, thedraftanalyst.substack.com. Most of the stuff is for subscribers only, but if you subscribe, you get a free copy of the draft report included in it. It's going to be released soon, and that's pretty much it. I'm just in draft report mode, just whatever. Follow me on Twitter at the Draft Analyst. YouTube channel's Prospect Film Room. That's it.
Perfect. Oh, I love your YouTube channel. Yeah, guys, definitely go check out the Prospect Film Room for film, and definitely sign up for a Substack. There's zero harm, and it's only
the content's amazing. Exactly.
Yeah. Vasili, anything you want to add?
Yeah, probably. I mean, kind of same gear as Steve. We're getting to the draft, so my goal is to watch some draft stuff that I can find and get more versed on the prospects and write some stuff up for the site potentially, and then hopefully we'll be able to get back to the draft as well for June and get some coverage for everybody for the Flyers kind of draft perspective. So that'll be awesome coverage for us and for Flyers Nitty coming up.
Awesome, and again, thank you, Steve, for coming on. Definitely excited to have you back on. Especially, I can't wait till we get to draft time. I'm sure you're excited too. But
it's gonna be so much fun.
We're probably gonna be nonstop talking about prospects about that time. So, all right, thank you again for listening, everybody. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, do all of that for us. It's a humongous help. Again, it drives our site, and we love you for all of the support that you provide. So again, keep watching, stay ever vigilant, and remember, always stay